By the early 1900s, America had begun to develop a rather romantic view of the West. It was the famous Wild West, an image that persists until the present. In this topic, we'll look at the reasons that this image is actually true, and in the next topic, we'll look at the reasons why, in fact, it's been overblown by the American culture. It included the image of the cowboy as tough and resilient, living by his wits and his six-shooter, a man in many ways admirable. It included the image of saloons and free-flowing liquor and danger abound. Crime and violence, it appeared, were common, with only the smartest and the toughest surviving. Throughout the 20th century, Americans have celebrated this image. One of the first movies ever made was a 1903 Western, The Great Train Robbery. Westerns remain a staple of Hollywood. Likewise, when television spread in the 1950s, some of the most popular programs were Westerns. In the 1950s and 1960s, such shows as The Virginian or Gunsmoke, The Rifleman or Bonanza, just to name a few, dominated ratings. One of the most popular shows was The Lone Ranger, a fictional masked avenger who fought outlaws. It's been remade many times, including most recently a 2013 movie starring Johnny Depp. All of these programs celebrated the Wild West in one way or another. Today, Cowboys are a popular sports team name. There are, for example, the University of Wyoming Cowboys, the Oklahoma State Cowboys, and of course, the National Football League's Dallas Cowboys. The image of toughness associated with the West is even employed in modern car commercials. Jeeps, trucks, and all-terrain vehicles are not, depicted in the suburbs, but rather out in the West, implying, of course, that they are tough enough for the West. Western wear remains popular. Cowboy boots, big belt buckles, cowboy hats, ornamental Western shirts are very popular in many parts of the country. The question that arises, therefore, is just how accurate was this image of the Wild West? Certainly, the lack of adequate law enforcement contributed to a certain wildness. The Western territories had a system of courts, but the territorial area was quite wide. U.S. Marshals were the first law enforcement, but they were sparse relative to their needs. As towns and counties formed, sheriffs took the lead, but communication between communities was difficult. Vigilante committees were often formed, made up of outraged citizens to enforce the law. Some territories, such as Texas, formed their own police force, like the Texas Rangers, originally a group of fighters who had fought in the Texas Revolution against Mexico. Some communities hired private security or employed bounty hunters to exact justice for an award. Some have noted that the lack of adequate law enforcement early in the Western period led to the so-called, quote, Code of the West, the idea that a real man needed to stand and fight his ground when threatened, demonstrating a reckless preoccupation with individual courage. This was quite the contrast to long-held English common law precedent that required a person to flee or retreat when faced with violent threats. Towns were dominated by young men, often ex-Confederates and ex-Union soldiers alike, hardly a recipe for stability. The sex ratio was often uneven. In Texas in the 1870s and 1880s, estimates ranged from 75 to 100 men for every woman, hardly, again, a recipe for stability. Liquor was indeed common, often brewed at home. The railroad spread brought better commercial brands of alcohol. The most common liquor was whiskey, gin, and beer. In any event, again, the prevalence of alcohol added to societal instability. Another factor was a transient population, either cowboys or others, who were simply passing through. The lopsided sex ratio led to a booming prostitution business in the towns where the cattle drives ended. These towns frequently had so-called dance halls, one-stop shopping for the cowboy at the end of his drive. He could wash, eat a hot meal, enjoy dancing and entertainment and alcohol, and hire one of the dance hall working girls. In the end, they could sleep. While debatable, some claim the term red light district originated in the cattle town of Dodge City, Kansas, which included the Red Light House Saloon. Most, however, say the term is much older and has international origins. In any event, Dodge City had a famous Boot Hill, so named, it was said, because the people who died were buried with their boots on. As many as 50,000 women worked as prostitutes during the late 19th century West. Like the cowboys, most were young, in their late teens or 20s. Often fed up with the dead end and low paying jobs or trades such as dressmaking or domestic service, a prostitute could make up to $30 per week, although much of the profit would have to go to pay for room and board. Race often shaped the prostitution profession. Uh, Near army forts, Indian women were most prevalent. In the Southwest, Mexican women were more numerous. And a sign of racism, white women were often paid the most, with African American women the least. There were certainly colorful characters who gave the West its image as wild and helped create legends. Uh, William Bonney was a name adopted by a young man named Henry McCartney. He was better known as Billy the Kid. Left an orphan in New Mexico, he turned to petty crime and then cattle rustling. He was nicknamed because he looked young with little facial hair, but he was deadly. He killed his first man at age 17 and perhaps has killed as many as 11 people in total. He captured and escaped and claimed that he would never capture him alive. Indeed, when the police called up to him, he fought and he died at age 21. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were leaders of the Hole in the Wall gang, and their method was to hold up trains out in the plains where there wasn't much law enforcement. The railroads eventually hired Pinkerton security agents to track them down, and the agents hounded them so much they went to South America, and eventually they were killed robbing in South America, although some think that Butch Cassidy returned to his mother in Kansas. One of the most famous of the Western outlaws was Jesse Woodson James from Missouri. A former Confederate guerrilla, James and his gang specialized in robbing stagecoaches and banks. At age 34, James was killed by a member of his own gang who hoped to collect the reward on James's head. John Wesley Hardin was often considered the West's most prolific gunman. He perhaps killed as many as 20 men in political disputes or community feuds. He once was killed and once when he was drunk, he killed a man through the wall, shooting through the wall of his hotel. The man had been snoring too loudly in the next room. In West Texas, Judge Roy Bean served as justice of the peace and as a bartender at the same time, often holding court at one end of the bar and serving drinks at the other. He was famous for once fining a corpse $40 for carrying a concealed weapon. He reportedly fell in love with an English actress, Lily Langtry, who he saw in a magazine but never actually met, and he named his bar the Jersey Lily after her. Wild Bill Hickok, whose real name was James Butler Hickok, served as a tough marshal at the end of the cattle drives. He was tall, with a stylish, droopy mustache and hair below his shoulders, and he became famous for saying, "Shoot first and ask questions later." Of course, he killed a policeman by accident. He died in a barroom gunfight over a poker dispute. And today, you might hear the dead man's hand, 2 pair, aces and eights. And that was what he was holding when he was shot, and that's been depicted many times in movies. The most famous gunfight, of course, was the shootout at OK Corral, as it's become known, near Tombstone, Arizona, a perfect name, in 1881. In that fight, the infamous Clanton family and their partner, Johnny Ringo, operated smuggling and cattle rustling rings. In the nearby town, the Earp brothers, Wyatt, Morgan, Jim, Virgil, and Warren, and their friends Doc Holliday and Bat Masterson, they operated on both sides of the law. When a feud between the two families took place, a shootout happened in which the Clantons were killed and Holliday and Morgan Earp were wounded. This was played up in the press and became famous. In any event, this explains, to the extent that all of these examples are true, it adds credence to the fact that the Wild West was actually wild. In our next section, we'll look at the way this image of the Wild West has been overplayed.